Dying, Obie Marsh cursed his wife as he had cursed her every day of their married life. "You've poisoned me," he gasped, writhing in agony. "Yes, you've poisoned me, you she-devil." Lucinda, his wife, nodded dully. "Yes, I poisoned you," she answered without emotion. "You are going to die anyway, the doctor said so. It's just a matter of time, maybe years, maybe months. And I can't stand this fighting any longer. 15 years of it. 15 years of hell." "Damn you," Marsh snarled through his clenched teeth, his bearded face twitching as a spasm of pain shot through his vitals. "We should have never gotten married," the woman went on quietly. "I never loved you, and you never loved me. It was a case of your folks and my folks sticking in between us and the ones we loved. You've always hated me because of Lizzie Roper, and God knows I wanted to marry all sides. Just because they wanted the farms joined, they made us act married. Me and you. Now we can't get a divorce because of the church, and I've just gotten sick of it all. Obie, sick of it all." "You hellion," he gasped, his body twitching spasmodically. "I got the idea of poisoning you when you first took sick," she went on in the same even tone. "Old Doc Plummer said that you might linger along for years. And I just couldn't stand it. Obie, I just couldn't stand it any longer. Your constant bullying and running over me." "You'll hang for it," Marsh said huskily. "I hope they torture you in hell." "Probably they will," Lucinda Marsh answered without emotion. "But it's worth it to have a little peace here on earth. It hasn't been any heaven living with you." Marsh twisted convulsively, his gnarled fingers closing and unclosing, his thick lips drooling. He pulled himself together with a mighty effort. He was a hard man, and strong men are difficult to lull. "I'll come back. From the grave, you hussy," he gasped. "T would be like you," his wife answered. "Waiting for you," he went on, trying to shake his fist in the woman's face. The effort was too great. He dropped back upon the pillow again, the sweat standing out on his forehead in beads, his body shaking with spasms. "God, it hurts," he whispered. "Just like A." Knife, the woman suddenly lifted her head. She was listening. "Somebody coming," she muttered, moving swiftly to the window. A roadster was entering the lane. "It's old Doc Plummer," she said, half to herself and half to the dying man. "The old fool's earlier than usual, and you can still talk." The man on the bed quivered. His fists clenched and his muscles tensed as he tried to drag himself back from the yawning pit that was getting. Dark Doc's liable to recognize the symptoms. The woman went on as she heard the car come to a stop in the front yard. A sheet had been thrown carelessly across the foot of the bed, seizing it. She wadded it into a bundle and pressed it against the face of the dying man. He fought against the stoppage of his breath with a feeble effort. She threw her whole strength against him. Suddenly his limbs straightened jerkily. She knew that he was dead. She sat up with a sigh of relief. The outside screen door slammed shut. Leaping to her feet, she threw the sheet across the back of a chair and turned to meet the doctor. "He just passed away in one of those spells," she said without emotion. "Come on him all of a sudden. Both the kids are at school, and I didn't have anybody to send for you. There's no use in saying I'm sorry for him not. I'm glad he's dead." The physician shook his head sympathetically. Like all country practitioners, he was conversant with the family affairs of his patients. For a moment he stood looking down at the still form of Obie Marsh Dodd. Then he pulled a sheet over it and turned to the woman. "Better sit down and take things easy," Mrs. Marsh, he said, following her into the other room. "I'll notify the undertaker and stop at the school and have the teacher send Mary and Jimmy home. Anybody else you want?" She shook her head negatively. "Tell Bill Reynolds to come prepared to take his body back with him," she said slowly. "This is my house, now mine. That's the way my pap and his pap fixed up the deeds. The quicker I get him out of my sight, the better it'll suit me. I never want to see him again till the day of the funeral, and I wouldn't tend that if it wasn't that people'd talk. He made life hell for me," she went on bitterly. "I've hated him from the day I married him. It's my house now, and I'm going to lock that room as soon as they take him away. I never want to see the inside of it again. There's too many memories hovering around it. I'd burn it to the ground if it wasn't for burning the rest of the house." She dropped into a rocking chair and gazed at the doctor, her gaunt body quivering with unshed tears. The physician patted her on the shoulder sympathetically. "You're overwrought, Lucinda," he said kindly, "overwrought and nervous." "I'll fix up a tonic and bring it over tonight. I don't need any tonic," she responded. "Knowing he's dead'll be tonic enough for me," the physician wagged his head solemnly. "Let's not speak ill of the dead," he said. "Everybody knows how he treated you. If there's nothing else I can do, I'll be getting along." In due time, the undertaker and his assistant came with their narrow wicker basket. Lucinda Marsh stood beside the door and waited for them as they carried their burden out. They looked at her quietly as she turned the key in the lock, then, removing it, placed it in her pocket. "I hope to God I never sake the inside of that room till my dying day," she said. Bill Reynolds, the undertaker, shook his head in agreement. He, too, knew the life that she had led with Obie Marsh. The passing years brought little change in the outward appearance of Lucinda Marsh. Gaunt, hard-featured, tight-lipped, and unemotional, she moved about the farm as of old, doing a man's work in the field, adding to the dollars that were already in the bank, and conducting her business along the lines to which she had been trained. She had never had friends, Obie Marsh had seen to that. She made none now. Her children grew to manhood and womanhood. Lydia Mary married and moved to the adjoining township. Lucinda made no complaint and no comment. Jimmy took the place of the hired man, lifting a bit of the burden of labor from his mother's shoulders. But she still held the reins of management. Then he, too, married and brought his wife to the big, gloomy old house at the end of the lane. Children came, 6 in quick succession. If their happy laughter wrought any change in the heart of the grim, silent old woman, she never showed it. Emma, Jimmy's wife, busy rearing her brood, was content to remain in the background. Lucinda Marsh was still the mistress of the house. Through all the years that one room just off from the parlor, father's room, they called it, remained closed, the key hidden away in Lucinda's bureau drawer. It was never mentioned in the family circle. The children knew that there was some horrible taboo that kept it from being talked about. Their childish imaginations did the rest. They passed it with bated breath when darkness fell and shadows hovered outside the circle made by the big kerosene lamp on the center table. They always played on the other side of the room, casting furtive glances toward the dark panels behind which lurked they knew not what. Then, with the passing of the years, came the hard times. First, the grasshoppers destroyed the crops. Then came the drought. Prices went up, wages dropped, factories closed. Mary was the first to feel the blow. The bank foreclosed on her husband's farm. Then came illness and another baby. Finally, she was forced to come home with her sick husband, and her little brother, Lucinda Marsh, as emotional as ever, made room for them. Jimmy's wife's brother lost his place in the city. Destitute, he appealed to his sister. She told her troubles to Lucinda Marsh. 4 more won't make any difference at the table, the old woman said grimly. Write and tell Am we'll make room for Ames somehow. Goodness knows, though, where we'll sleep. They were sitting at the dinner table when this conversation took place. It was Mary who, with a quick glance at her brother, ventured to speak that which was in all of their minds. Father's room. She said timidly, "Couldn't we open that up and air it before they come, and let Em sleep in there for a moment?" There was an odd silence. Lucinda Marsh turned her sunken eyes on her daughter, then glanced at the faces of the others. I vowed that I'd never set foot in that room till my dying day, she said finally. But they wouldn't be you, Mother Mary argued. And we're crammed for room right now. Where else can we sleep on? Lucinda Marsh quietly laid down her knife and fork, her thin lips set in a straight, grim line. If anybody sleeps in that room, it will be me, she said finally. I lived with your father for 15 years, hatting him every day more and more. And he hated me worse. I hated him, if such a thing is possible. The room's filled with our hatred. It's locked up in there, smoldering and ready to be fanned into flame again. But Mother... Lucinda Marsh straightened her bent old shoulders with a gesture of finality. I'll move into it, she said grimly. I wish that I hadn't mentioned it, Mary said regretfully. I knew that there was some sort of sentiment attached to it, but... The old woman cut her off. Sentiment. Hate, you mean, she snapped. But maybe it's for the best. I'm an old woman way past 70. I'm about to die anyway, she stopped, her aged eyes taking on a faraway look. Maybe it's foreordained, she said, half to herself. He said that he'd be, waiting for me. Maybe he is. Who knows? She rose from the table and took a step toward the door. I'll open it up in the morning and let it air out, she said. She moved up the stairway to the upper floor, her lips straight and tight. For a long time, Lucinda Marsh sat in the straight-back chair beside her bed, her weary eyes gazing into vacancy, while the panorama of the years unfolded itself. To her had come a great urge, a desire which she had kept on leash for close to half a century, the longing that comes to all murderers, a yearning to visit the scene of her crime. 1,000 times before, the same desire had swept over her, and she had always fought it off. Now, however, with the fulfillment of her wish only a few hours away, there had come to her a seeming need for haste. The closed room was calling to her. Within her brain, a voice was shrieking now. Now, to her aged mind, it was the voice of the man she hated, the man she had killed. Getting up, she went to the bureau and, opening the drawer, found the key where she had hidden it so many years before. She held it in her gnarled fingers, fondling it and crooning over it. Her room was at the head of the stairs. One by one, she heard the members of the household go to their rooms. Finally, the gloomy old house was filled with an indescribable quietness. Rising, she opened the door a tiny crack and peered out into the dark hallway. Satisfied that all were asleep, she picked up the small hand lamp and tiptoed furtively down the creaking stairs. A storm was in the air. She could hear the wind rising and shrieking through the branches of the trees. There was something reminiscent about the mournful wail. She stopped a moment, her head bent forward. Then memory swept over her. T was like this the night before he died, she muttered to herself. Her heart was beating a trifle faster as she reached the dark, grim door. She hesitated an instant. Then, transferring the lamp to her left hand, she inserted the key in the lock. It turned hard, as if reluctant to reveal the mysteries it hid. Then the tumbler shot back. For a moment she waited, her fingers on the knob. She was trembling now, shaking with an emotion she did not understand. He said that. He'd be waiting for me, she murmured. I wonder. If he is, she turned the knob and pushed against the panel. The aged hinges squeaked protestingly. The door swung open. A wave of malignancy and hatred surged over her. She stepped inside, her lips closed in a tight, grim line. Just inside the door she waited, the lamp held high above her head, her eyes taking in every detail. There was the bed, unmade, where he had died. The thought came to her that Bill Reynolds, the undertaker, the last person to step foot in the room, was gone too. At the head of the bed was the little stand. On top of it was the glass in which she had administered the poison. Beside it was a bottle of medicine, half empty. The label, covered with old Doc Plummer's crabbed hieroglyphics, was yellow and faded. Doc Plummer, he too, had been to his grave for years. There was the pillow where he died. One corner was twisted, where he had held it when the last spasm of agony had knifed its way through his vitals. Nothing was changed. He said that he'd be waiting for me, she said again. The room was musty and mildewed, the dust of years over everything. She closed the door and set the lamp upon the little stand. Going to the window, she pushed it up to its full length. The wind swept in, howling and shrieking. The lamp sputtered, causing queer, grotesque shadows to dance in the distant corners. Across the back of the chair where she had thrown it years before was the yellowed sheet with which she had smothered the dying breath out of her husband. There was a darker spot upon its mildewed surface. She knew it for the spittle that had drooled from his mouth. She moved to the center of the room, still peering furtively into the shadows. He said that he'd come back from the grave and be waiting for me, she said again and again. A fresh gust of wind howled through the window. The lamp sputtered, smoked, flared up, then went out. With the sudden darkness came a feeling of dread. For the first time in her life, Lucinda Marsh was afraid. Out of the darkness came a shapeless thing of white. For a moment, it hung suspended in midair. It hovered over her, its long, shapeless arms reaching out for her. The wind shrieked with merry gusto. Said that he'd be waitin', she murmured. It swept over her, holding her in its folds, twisting about her, smothering her. God, she shrieked, clawing at the enveloping tentacles. He kept his word. He was waitin' in. In the morning they found her. Twisted about her head and throat was a yellowed sheet, the sheet with which she had smothered her husband.